Conor McNamara.
Gormil Magav, Michael. On behalf of National University of Ireland Galway, it's a great honour to be here today to talk to you very briefly about the events of Easter weekend, to commemorate it as a community. In my role this year, I've been fortunate enough to visit and speak at 78 different events, mostly in Galway, but as far afield as the Bronx and New Jersey and elsewhere. And the privilege of going to different places and being welcomed into communities and meeting the ancestors of those who fought and meeting the school children and the teachers has been something that will always stay with me, regardless of what the future might bring. But when I was reflecting here today on my opening remarks, I went over some of the accounts of the events at Limepark. And I think what we need to remember when we remember the end of the rebellion is we're not here to commemorate or remember the end of Easter week, but the beginning of a revolution that was to come. It is from Easter week 1916 that emerges a new generation of Irish revolutionaries. Within 2 years of events here behind us, the RIC had lost all authority in Ireland. Its officers boycotted, its stations unmanned virtually. The creation of a new republic emerged from places seemingly unlikely, such as Limepark and Killeen, Castlegar and Carnmore. Today, when we remember these people, we must reflect also that what they fought against was the humiliation that it was for Irish people to be in the British Empire, to be seen forever as essentially second-class English people. Our culture, our language, our songs, and so on, degraded within a state that believed that English culture was the height of civilization. So here today, and as at other days, we celebrate the rebels through song, through poetry, through music. And this is the most appropriate forum. We have left aside violence in this country. And when we reflect on 1916 and the events of 1920, these were democratic people in popular organisations with no other democratic avenue left open to them. Since 1879, the demand for home rule, as expressed through the democratic franchise, had been ignored. People claim, a small minority, what popular mandate had 1916? If we put it in a historical context, the reply is very swift. What historical mandate had the British Empire ever? The people of Clarnbridge or of Ireland were never given a vote to be part of the British Empire. People in modern day India and Pakistan and likewise. Empires are maintained and endure through violence. And it was only eventually through violence that they were destroyed. And today, as we recall the deeds of Liam Mellows, Michael Howley, and all of those great revolutionaries, let us not forget that the British Empire and all its trappings lie today in the dustbin of history. There is no monument in India or Pakistan or in Ireland to the deeds of the British Empire. Today, as communities, our landscape is being dotted with communal celebrations of men and women who took their part in destroying that force for evil across the world. These were also people who left school at 12 and 13. They went to school barefoot. They went to school maybe with a small breakfast or 2 dinners a day. But yet they cherished in their hearts ideals about the value of Irishness. That Ireland was something worth sacrificing. It wasn't merely a pale imitation of Englishness. It was something unique and should be cherished. And without our own state, it would lack forever self-respect. Writing in 1919, a letter that I've quoted a number of times from, but I think it bears repeating. Liam Mellows, when he was on the run in New Jersey, between New York and New Jersey, he stayed for 4 years. He wrote to a friend, Miss Herbert, and he said, "It is the deed that counts, and there I have failed lamentably." Subsequent events following the writing of that letter have shown and have proven that Liam Mellows and his comrades, far from failing, set in progress a series of events that by the July of 1920, 110,000 Irish men and women in every parish in Ireland were members of the Irish Volunteer and Cumann movement, to create and to elevate our community from the degradation in which it floundered as members of the British Empire. So when we talk about Easter week in Galway, it is very much an episode that lay unrecognised and underappreciated in the history of the Irish Rebellion. It had been dismissed by a number of authors as something merely as a skirmish, one author described it as. The British authorities in 1916 had a very different conclusion about the Galway Rebellion. The official inquest at Dublin Castle into events in Galway concluded the following: that the Sinn Féin insurrection was so quickly put down and confined to so few districts outside of the metropolitan area must be ascribed to the fortunate arrest of Sir Roger Casement and the failure of the German ship to land the required arms and ammunition. There is no reason whatsoever to believe that if these arrangements had miscarried, the Irish volunteers in any county would not have held back. In fact, the evidence is all the other way. The failure of Roger Casement's mission to land arms off the Cork and Kerry coast put the national element of the rising into chaos, but more acutely the Galway dimension to the Easter Rising. With 29 or so rifles, 650 men and women, were thrown into an immediate crisis. What do we do? Do we stay out or do we go home? And it is here behind us where the final agonising decision was made. That decision to disband was a sensible and logical decision given the subsequent atrocities by the British military on the civilians of Dublin, 480 odd of whom lay dead on the streets of the North Inner City predominantly. So, what are we remembering? We're remembering people who cherished the idea of community and of the hope of progress, without falling into cynicism. And again, in this castle behind us, thankfully Mellows, Alfred O'Monaghan, Father Fahy and other heroes left us an account. This one I like the most. Liam Mellows wrote, "On the night of the second last day of the rising in Galway, things looked so black that it was felt incumbent that I should address the men, so that it not be said they'd been led on in ignorance, made dupes of and fooled. Can I ever forget the scene? Several hundred men drawn up in the country yard of a castle residence that was our headquarters at 2 o'clock in the morning. A weird light cast on the assembly by several torches of bog deal. There was a dead silence, and for a few moments, then a big powerful countryman, one of the simple, honest, and as I know here in New York would denigrate, uncouth, stepped to the front and said, 'We came out to fight for a republic, and now, with the help of God, we are not afraid to die for it.' So whilst those men disbanded, went to their homes, awaited the inevitable roundup, 328 Galway men dispersed in 14 jails across England, from Wormwood Scrubs, Aylesbury, Nottingham, Barlini and Perth in Scotland, eventually before congregating with the 1,900 volunteers in Vrongok. It is when they returned to their communities, they began to reorganise in January 1917 at Kane's pub in Oranmore to create the structures that was to lead to the disintegration of British rule in this part of Ireland. So we are not celebrating an end but a beginning, and a beginning in which the women of Cumann in particular played a central role. And reflecting on this series of events, anyone who's attended across Galway, the first event I was at in September, there was 11 people at it. The last 40 or so events there hasn't been enough room for the people that want to come and participate and to talk. And this is a credit to the local community activists. This has been a dignified but the people's commemorative season. It has been facilitated by local people like Michael Howley here today, like Eamon Gilligan in Crowell, Jerry Clunan, Brian Quinn and others, who've tirelessly foreseen this period many years in advance. And I would honestly say that Galway County Council are unparalleled in their facilitation of these events, financial and otherwise, that finally, after 100 years of ignoring the Rising, we have done justice to the memory of these men and women. And let us also remember, when we talk about the rebellion, we remember these men as comrades, we remember them in the jails of England together. But many, by 1923 and 24, many of them, including, for instance, Joe Howley of Oranmore, who was shot dead on the 5th of December 1920 at Broadstone Railway Station, Michael Athy of Oranmore, who was shot dead following the Limepark ambush in 1920, and of course Liam Mellows himself, shot dead in December 1922 at the height of the Civil War. The divisions of the Civil War obscured us as a community to correctly and properly celebrate the achievements of the Republic. Imperfect and flawed as the Republic is and was, it is something worth building on and cherishing, and something worth following on the work of these people. But we should remember and embrace them as comrades and not as enemies, but men who share the vision, along with the women of Cumann. So, how do we describe them? We know they were poor, we know they were rural, they were the sons of the small farmers and the labourers of East Galway. But yet, they defied the might of the Empire. In the South Galway flying column, the North Galway column that roamed between Headford and Mount Bellew, 2 men from the North Galway area were involved in the 1916 Rising. But yet 4 years later, at Kilconnelly and Caltra, at Headford, at Kilroe and at Mount Boyla, these men rose from their homes and carried out devastating attacks on the military. Likewise in West Connemara, likewise in the South Galway flying column that operated in the hills behind us. So when Mellows was asked to describe these men, he wrote as such: "Many of them are poor, almost all are. Most of them are unheard of, yet their work for Ireland deserves to be known. It never will be in our day anyway, in all probability, but it is to them the thanks of future generations of the Irish people will be due. They gave all in silence, seeking no reward and getting none." Today, it is through song and story and our culture that we celebrate these men, not through militaristic displays. Because this is what the idea of the rebellion was, to cherish the very notion of Irishness as being equal with any other state. Writing about the 1798 rebellion, Seamus Heaney, the great poet laureate, Nobel Prize winner, wrote his final line of Requiem for the Croppies. "And in August, they buried us without shrove or coffin, and in August, the barley grew up out of our graves." Well, out of the graves of Liam Mellows, Joe Howley, Michael and Ty, others, has risen a new state and a new hope and confidence in Irishness, and a belief from this generation that equality and social justice are not granted by empires but seized. They must be taken, and that taking devolves from time to time moral compromises. So in paying tribute to all of those men and women of this generation, we remember today the things that we take for granted, the cachet that Irishness has around the world, how hundreds and thousands of people come here for that very culture that was so degraded, that language and that beautiful music, and so on and so forth. Those ideals today that were taken so much for granted in our day-to-day lives had to be established, and they were done in arms by this generation. It is to them that our thanks is eternally due, and we will continue, I hope, in the next 5 years to remember them in all of their complexities as honest and ordinary people, not as icons or gods, but in the earthly reality of their day-to-day struggles. So I want to thank everyone for inviting me here to speak. And just to say, as this season draws to a close, for me personally, it was an honour to be invited to the communities of Athenry and Killeen, Clarenbridge, Craughwell, Oranmore, Marry, Kilbacantee, Inisheer, and all of these fine places, and to have the role for the university to say a few words. And it is my intention, looking back, to document and to remember each of these special occasions, and hope that in some small way we as communities have done justice to those people who endured so much. Gur míle maith agah.